first question is, what is your thinking on reparations for the descendants of Africans formerly enslaved in the U.S.? Well, this is a question that has a lot of different parts to it. So I want to try to speak to different parts of it. I think that if you want to put it that way, as a moral question, there's absolutely no question, can be no debate about the fact that people are deserving of reparations. The question is, what's the best way to make up for these crimes that were committed and the damage that was done by this? There is a great deal left over from history in this and in other areas, but speaking specifically of slavery and all the oppression since slavery, that will have to be overcome in the process of making revolution in the new society. It will have to be overcome, and it will be overcome. Now, as far as the specific demand for reparations, let's start with that first. I think in a way the most important part of that demand is that it raises and shines a spotlight on all this horrendous oppression that the rulers of this country continually try to sweep under the rug and deny that happened or say that it no longer has any meaning and importance. So to raise that demand is very, very, very important even in that way, to expose the crimes they've committed and the legacy of those crimes, and not just the legacy, but the continuation of those crimes in the forms in which they're carried out today. So in that sense, even just in that way, raising the demand for reparations is very important. At the same time, you do get into some complications if you think about how under this system reparations would actually be paid. To whom would they be paid, and in what form? Are they going to be paid out individually to each descendant of Africans formerly enslaved in the U.S.? And if so, how is the amount for each individual to be determined, and what's going to happen with that money? Because frankly, no matter how much they paid, first of all, they could never really pay for what they've done in that form. But at the same time, on the other side, what they pay, if you spread it out among millions and tens of millions of people, which is what we're talking about, even if they paid billions of dollars, if it just goes as individual income to individuals, it's not going to mean that much, frankly. So how are you going to set up some way to take this money? What is a way that it can be used for the common good of the people who suffered this way? Is there a form in which some sort of community organizations can be set up, or some means whereby this could be used for the needs of the people broadly, rather than frankly being distributed among individuals and really not amounting to that much? So that'd be a question you'd have to take up. Now again, that's not a reason not to raise the demand or not to fight for the demand, but it does point to the fact that really overcoming this whole legacy requires revolution and requires going at this a whole different way with a new society. As I said, there's much that has to be overcome, and it will be overcome. One of the ways in which this will be overcome, for example, with regard to black people, is that there's a whole question of the right to self-determination, which is in our party's program. This means, given the whole history of the development of black people as a nation within the United States, centered in the South, where the plantation system was, what's sometimes called the Black Belt, which has to do actually with the color of the soil in the South, where the plantation system was centered. There is a whole historical basis which establishes the right of black people in this country to have self-determination in that territory. That is, to actually secede, to withdraw from the larger country and to set up their own country if they so desire. So this is one question that has to be upheld and taken into account and applied in the new society once the old system is overthrown, because this will not really be possible within the confines of this system. Any kind of a self-determination, so-called, that would be exercised in that form under this system would be nothing but another neo-colony controlled by the imperialists, because they would never allow any kind of independent state of the formerly oppressed slaves and black people in general to be established right within the confines of the territory that they claim as their own. So this is one important principle that will be upheld. whether or not this is something that would actually be in the concrete interests of the masses of black people, to actually secede and withdraw from the larger country once you have a socialist country and form a separate state, is something that would have to be determined concretely at the time. Now, the way we put it in our program is we uphold the right to do this, but we do not favor it under present conditions and conditions we foresee, because we think it's in the best interest of the masses of people overall, including the masses of black people, to have the largest and most powerful possible socialist state in the largest territory. But it's one thing to say you don't think something should be done under the conditions you can foresee, and it's another thing to say there are no conditions under which it would be a good thing to do that, which we don't say, and which would be wrong to say. And it's another thing still to say that people don't have a right to do that. You can uphold the right to do something while saying that in your opinion it's not the right thing to do at a given time. For example, the right to divorce. You can say that the right to divorce is important, especially for women who are oppressed in these kind of relations. But that doesn't mean that you think every woman who's married should get a divorce. It depends concretely on the nature of the relationship and in the conditions they find themselves in. But the important thing is upholding the right to do this. And what does that mean? It means, as you make revolution, that unlike under the present system, this question cannot be and will not be settled by force. That is, it will not be a matter of forcibly keeping people within the confines even of a new socialist state if they want to exercise the right to self-determination and withdraw from that state. You can argue with people that this is not the right thing to do, that it would be better to stay in the same socialist state and struggle things out in that confines because we'd be more powerful and would serve the interests of the people better. And it does serve the interests of the people better to have a larger socialist state, a more powerful socialist state. You can achieve more things, both economically and also in terms of defending yourself. But it's one thing to make that argument, and it's another thing to say, but if you don't agree with me, I'm going to force you to stay here. Then you're not upholding the right to self-determination. What we mean by upholding the right is that this question will be settled by the black masses themselves without the use of force by the socialist state itself, on the basis of what the masses of people themselves, in this particular case the masses of black people, determine to be what they want to do and what's in their best interests. And the exact forms of that will have to be worked out as the revolution advances and seizes and consolidates power. But this is the principle that has to be upheld. But even if the expressed will of the masses of black people is to stay within the larger socialist state, there's still the question for them, and there's also the question for other nationalities oppressed under this system, of having the right to autonomy within that larger socialist state, in significant areas within that larger socialist state. There's still the question of being able to exercise, in other words, local self-government within the larger framework of the overall government if people decide to remain a part of that, and according to the general principles of the new socialist state. And what this means is in things like areas of culture and language, customs, and so on, these will be respected and upheld in accordance with the history of different peoples within what is now the United States. In the new socialist society, this will be respected and upheld, and people will be able to exercise local self-government in large or significant territories where they've historically lived or where they're presently constituted in large numbers. In rural areas, but also in urban areas. And it means that in the affairs of those local areas, they themselves will determine policy on all the different questions of education and other things and culture and so on within the larger framework of the existence and the principles governing the socialist state as a whole. And this has to be applied not only with regard to black people, but with regard to all the different nationalities, Chicanos and others who've been oppressed also under this system, who suffered national oppression and been the victims of racism.